Pixel Sift is proudly supported by Murdoch University School of Arts, and if you're looking for a creative degree, they might be able to help you out. If you're keen to learn more, I'll give you a URL. You know how these work. Drop this into your browser, murdoch.edu.au/arts, and you can find out exactly what they've got on offer. That's murdoch.edu.au/arts to check out all great creative degree. You can search for Murdoch University in your browser as well. Murdoch University School of Arts, proudly supporting Pixel Sift.
Pixel Sift.
Hello and welcome to episode 155 of Pixel Sift. It's a show dedicated to the making, the art, the process, the study of video games made in Australia and around the world. My name is Gianni. I am the executive producer of Pixel Sift, and joining me tonight is my co-host, Mitch Lowe. Hello, Mitch.
Hey, how are we, everybody? I'm one of two Mitches on this show.
We've got two Mitches. We've got two Mitches that we're both really interested to hear from. Our guest on this episode of Pixel Sift is Mitchell Clifford, who's the co-founder and lead animator at Brisbane's 5 Live Studios. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mitchell.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
We can't wait to learn a little bit more about your game.
Yes, so we'll be talking about the new game Windbound.
Let's jump into it.
Australia's best video game podcast.
Subscribe to Pixel Sift on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are found.
Now, we're talking about Windbound. It's a game that's come out not that long ago, very recently, made here in Australia. Now, for people who haven't come across it before, Mitch, how would you describe what Windbound is?
Windbound is it's a blend of like your survival crafting games, but with mixed in a bit of like your third-person adventure games as well. So it takes place in like on an archipelago where you're shipwrecked and you got like your typical sort of survival situation, crafting and all of that. But with as I said, more of a focus on also having like a bit of a narrative and everything to take you through the world as well. And being on an archipelago, obviously there's islands and everything around there. So in order to actually traverse your way around the world, you're actually you're gathering your resources to actually craft a boat to start going around, continue to survive, and hopefully get home.
Yeah, because basically when you start the game, you wash up on a beach and you just need to collect all the resources you need to go and continue onwards. Now, for people who would know Five Lives, the game that you made previously that everyone would probably be aware of if they're in the Australian game development scene, or maybe not aware that this is an Australian-made game, is Satellite Rain, and that is a very sort of dark and cyberpunk world, and this is really bright and colourful. Why the full 180 on the direction? How did it all come about?
Well, there's a number of things. Like, for one thing, with a studio of 5 people, like there's so many different things that we want to make. Obviously, we all love cyberpunk, so we started with Satellite Rain. But it was a number of things. Like after we released Satellite Rain, we actually continued to work on it for quite a while. It was about 12 months because we did quite a lot of stuff to it, including bringing in, like, because it was a Kickstarter originally. So we had stretch goals and stuff that some of them we met, some of them we didn't. And then after it was released, we decided to go ahead and start bringing in some more of those features that we wanted to have, biggest one being multiplayer co-op. So there was a lot of time to do that. And over that time, us all being gamers got addicted to various games over the time. And one of the big ones was a lot of the studio all got really stuck into Don't Starve. Obviously, very, very different type of game to Satellite Rain. And so there was a few of us that got really into that, but then a few of us who tried joining in, because you know what it is when everybody's playing a game together, you kind of want to all play together. And a few of us sort of got a little bit, didn't grab us the same way just because of the you know how you sort of get dumped into open world survival sorts of games, and you kind of got to just figure it out and fend for yourself, and that's great. A lot of people enjoy doing that, but sometimes myself and another couple of guys in the studio also felt like we wanted to have a bit more of like a clear objective of what we wanted to do, sort of what you get in adventure games. So during the time of like supporting Satellite Rain and then lunchtimes filled with Don't Starve and other games like that, we started sort of bouncing ideas around for how we could sort of try and find where the overlap was on the Venn diagram of those sorts of games. And yeah, that's sort of how we started going down a different route.
Can you tell us more about how Don't Starve inspired systems or gameplay in Windbound? It was a pretty high level type thing, kind of like just the concept of starting in an area that you don't know your way around. It's all a blank canvas essentially. Going around and finding all of your resources to start building up in a sort of dangerous sort of world. There were some more, Don't Starve is like actually nighttime is all dangerous and everything. We started playing around with elements like that as well, but ultimately it ended up more just being the broader sort of premise of surviving, but trying to bring in that sort of narrative and clear goals and objectives and that sort of thing.
It's got a really striking sort of visual style. Can you tell me a little bit about how you sort of developed, I guess, the language you use in design for this game?
So we looked at a lot of one of the words we used a lot early on when we were not just talking about the art and stuff like that, but just the sort of mood and vibe that we wanted to have was not dark and gritty like Satellite Rain, but we kept saying sort of whimsical, if that makes sense, like a not cartoony and crazy, but that sort of a stylized whimsical sort of thing. Things disappear with a puff of smoke rather than just sort of going into a pocket or that sort of thing.
Kind of a little bit Saturday morning cartoony in that sort of way?
Yeah, kind of like that, but not all the way at that end of the spectrum, if that makes sense. We looked at a lot of Studio Ghibli was a big one. That's a pretty high bar to try and hit, but that was one of the big influences there. That's how we sort of got to that kind of stylized. One thing that was what we wanted to try to see if we could do, and I feel like we did a pretty good job. Eventually, it took some time. Was trying to mix that stylized sort of aesthetic with sort of your more modern kind of rendering techniques, like your physically based lighting and that sort of thing. They don't really play together that nicely because they're sort of trying to do two different things. But once we've experimented a bit and we've managed to come across you'll notice that, like, for instance, the characters are rendered a little bit different to the environment. They've got a little bit more of a cell shadery sort of look, but it's not actually like your Wind Waker style by any means. It's there's still play in there with like your metals. You look kind of like metal and all that sort of thing. So there's still these kind of realistic gradients and all that sort of thing in there, but we felt that also helped separate it a bit more from the environment. And again, in the same sort of way that you see in Ghibli and those types of cartoons and that sort of thing, how you've got your characters are obviously stand out quite a lot from your the more painterly sort of look of the environment. So yeah, that was something that we were trying to achieve, and we feel pretty confident that we executed on it reasonably well. But there's always things that you want to improve.
I guess that's the benefit of being a game that you can update. And I know in the last couple of weeks you've done a lot of updates to the game, sort of changing some of the systems. One of the things we quite often hear from developers is that quite often people's feeling might be correct, but the way that they think about what the game is doing or what it's not doing is incorrect. Can you give us some examples about how you've sort of adjusted the game since it came out in late August?
Yeah, so one of the things that we suspected early on, because Windbound, which I didn't mention before, it also has like these roguelike elements to it. And they've been there basically from day one. But one thing that we suspected could be the case is with going down this adventure-y type route and with the art style and that sort of thing, that it might potentially it might have some appeal to the people who aren't really normally into that sort of game. And that was also one of the objectives, to try and like maybe get people getting an experience they weren't expecting. But to alleviate any sort of like big shocks or anything, we added in 2 different game modes. One that was sort of less let people get back into the game a bit quicker than you normally would with a roguelike. So that was the survivalist mode is your typical roguelike type mode, and storyteller, which eases back on some of those sorts of elements. But what we found when the game came out was, it seemed like a lot of the people who were getting it were actually more interested in that more traditional adventure type mode. And we found that we really just didn't lean into that as much as we could have. So some of the updates that we've done have not really done so much changing the survival experience. That's pretty much the same. But we've gone ahead and made changes to basically make that the adventure mode. And we renamed it from like story mode to adventure mode, because we didn't want people to think that one's got a story and the other doesn't. They're the same sort of thing, just with a few different approaches to how your progression is handled. So we just made it so that it's people can get back to where they were if they meet their end at the hand of one of the predators in the world, back to where they were a bit quicker without losing so much, and basically able to enjoy it a bit more like your regular adventure game.
Thank you for that game mode, by the way. I definitely, me personally, not being that skilled of a gamer, I needed it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. Like I obviously, having played this game for every day for last several years now, I'm pretty good at it. So I can get by on the survivalist mode just fine. But yeah, I agree. I'm the same. Like I come at it sort of wanting to have a more traditional adventure mode, and that's the thing. As I said, we've got 5 people in the studio. We've got people who always play it on survivalist mode, and we've got people who always play it on the adventure mode. So.
Rybags88 on Twitch says it's a really purty game, really pretty looking game.
Thank you.
One of the things that really sort of captured me, and this is sort of drawing from my own experiences, was the way that the sailing works in the game, and I guess the mechanics of sailing. I know it's a simplified version of it, but you did seem to really capture that feeling of what it's like being on the water, managing sails and going into the wind and all of that sort of stuff. Where did the inspiration for all that come from, and how do you have a background in that, or do other people do?
I don't really have a background in sailing myself, but our designer Chris, he was drawing on some of his limited experiences with going out in his brother's one of his brother's boats and ending up in the water a few times. But yeah, one of the things we wanted to do with the sailing, because like one of the quick comparisons people do is Wind Waker. Which, I mean, totally understandable. It's a stylized aesthetic out on the water and adventure games and so on. But we didn't want it to feel like just like a motorboat in a way. We wanted to really feel like people are dealing, like they're in the world, you know. There's wind, there's waves, and you've got the tools to deal with that. So we played around with a few different approaches for the sailing early on, and really we landed on what we've got now pretty quickly, more or less, and it took people a little bit of time to sort of get their head around it, just because, I mean, obviously if you've never been sailing, then we can't expect people to know how to properly deal with all of that. But with a little bit of tweaking and finessing, we landed on something that we felt was a pretty good representation. I'm hesitant to say realistic, like it's certainly not realistic sailing, but it feels right. If that makes sense, like it feels physically like you react to the wind in a believable way. Believable's probably a better word for it.
It was just the way that it was kind of bucking through the waves when you're going up against the wind that just sort of immediately brought that memory back for me. So it was really sort of interesting to sort of see how it would, how it kind of felt in that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's things going on under the hood that are sort of massaging it into what feels better rather than like what is actually realistic. But I mean, that's the case. That's just making games.
That's just making games, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, Mitch, we want to ask a little bit about your personal history. Can you tell us what was your path into game development that brought you to the point of making this game?
Yeah, so, I mean, the whole time, like all through high school when we were all sort of having to start making those decisions about what we wanted to do after high school, I didn't know that I wanted to make games specifically, but I was always very interested in 3D animation, and so I first just started looking into how I could pursue that. I ended up after high school studying, doing a degree in animation, and I was lucky enough at the time, like to basically go straight out of studying into a job at Chrome Studios in Brisbane. That's where I met actually just about everybody who I started Five Lives with. And I was there for a few years, and then I started experiencing what a lot of Australian game developers unfortunately experience, is all of the closures and redundancies and all of that sort of thing that's sort of plagued the industry for a long time. So I went from Chrome Studios. I started there as a junior. I was actually hired by who is now my boss, is now one of the co-founders here at Five Lives. So that's an interesting change in power dynamic.
It's interesting to think about the legacy of those studios like Chrome, Studio Bondi, for example, these big Australian companies that have now sort of spun off, and some of those people kind of keep together. What do you think the legacy of that time is for you?
I certainly learnt a lot there. Obviously, like it was my first proper job in games. Something I know, like, is also, I guess, a benefit of somewhere like Chrome. It was really big. Like I was there during its peak, and it got to, I mean, spread across several studios. They got to like around 400 staff or something. It was pretty crazy. But the benefit of that, I guess, is made lots of connections. So after the fact, after things started changing and people started moving around and everything, me, not just myself, but the other people here that started Five Lives with, already had a lot of good connections with people to go ahead and when we had this idea of like, oh, we want to do a Kickstarter for a game, that's great. We know a lot of concept artists. So yeah, it sort of worked out. It's sad, like obviously when people lose their jobs and everything, and unfortunately a lot of people have had to go overseas because there just wasn't anything here after that. All these big studios just up and disappeared, and there's really been a resurgence since then in all these really small studios like us. I mean, we've thankfully been pretty lucky, managed to have a bit of growth and bring on people again where we could. I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah.
No, I think that's part of the story of it, isn't it? You know, it did leave people in an interesting spot when all those studios folded, and it really did look like it was the end for Australian game development for a lot of companies and a lot of people in their careers. So I think talking about that process of making it into 2020, still making games, is a really, really interesting one.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned Team Bondi. That's another place where I ended up for a short period because there was a lot after Chrome went down. Again, because there were a lot of people there. There was a lot of people then looking for work in fewer and fewer places. So I was doing contract work. I went down, to Team Bondi, and I was living in. I'm from Brisbane, but I was living in Sydney for like 4 or 5 months, working there on LA Noire, and then I was quite surprised actually after like completing work there, and the game launched, and it was quite successful and everything. But yeah, and then Team Bondi are no longer around, and then came in, and I ended up at Sega Studios Australia, which is where the 5 of us here that started Five Live Studios were when we got the news that was shutting down. So yeah, thankfully, I mean, we were again. There's been a lot of luck in our careers. We were lucky in that respect that they at least gave us a lot of heads up. Like they gave us a lot of warning because we were working on the remake of Castle of Illusion there at the time, and they gave us the news. It was a good like 5 months or so ahead of time. So obviously that's a good and they were, as terrible as it was to be someone to like make that choice to close down the studio, they were very accommodating with letting people do side projects and look for other jobs and everything in the meantime. So we used that time, instead of looking for jobs like maybe a sane person would have done, go ahead and spend the time putting together a Kickstarter campaign. It was a risk, but it paid off pretty well. Here we are. Yeah, as you said, 2020, still making games.
So basically, I wanted to ask about like what inspires you now? Like even like so now you've been through all that, and like where do you draw inspiration from? We've already talked about Don't Starve, but what else?
Again, as I said, like, being 5 of us in the studio, 5 founders of the studio. There's more than 5 people here now. Ideas are plenty. Like between us, we play anything and everything under the sun. So ideas are we get inspiration from everything we play, everything we watch. We want to go back and like we've still got more things that we would love to keep doing on Windbound. We've got Satellite Rain is still something that we really love, and we've had all sorts of plans and things that we want to do there. Basically, when you start a studio because you want to have that sort of freedom to work on the things that you personally want to work on. The hardest thing is getting 5 people to agree on something.
Is there you mentioned there, seeing another Satellite Rain, is that in the cards, or is it always just one of those projects that you needs to wait for exactly the right time for it to happen?
I mean, it's certainly on the cards. Like we love Satellite Rain. We owe our existence to that game. So it's certainly something like we've got so many documents of all different types of ideas and things that we want to do with that. Just not even necessarily. The great thing about something like Satellite Rain being a cyberpunk world is you can do so much with that. Like it doesn't just have to be like strategy game. I mean, to be fair, like that's obviously the most obvious thing to keep doing with Satellite Rain is like real-time strategy. But we've had ideas bouncing around all over the place. So a couple of the guys have been going on about like, cool, like an actual type Blade Runner type detective noir cyberpunk type game, adventure game in there. And there's like more action RPG type Diablo type games and everything that we've just got so many different ideas that we would love to do in that world. But yeah, it's really finding the right time to do it.
Now, Mitch, we were checking out your Twitter, and I wanted to mention that we were very much admiring pictures of your dog. And I wanted to ask.
I think it was almost a 1-to-1 ratio between Windbound tweets and dog tweets.
We were like, oh, what's Mitch up to right now? We're like, oh, his dog is pretty cool. So do things like pets and things like that influence your game development? Also, Daniel, can you put up that picture of, we got a collage of the pictures of your dog up right now.
Koji, my boy, my fur baby Koji.
And for anyone who's listening at home, we'll put a link to the slide as well so you can see it if you're listening after the fact, if you're not watching it live. Yeah.
Yeah, Koji's a bit of a celebrity here. He comes into the office occasionally,
Brilliant.
and hasn't for a little while actually. And I get comments from other people. When's Koji coming into play again?
Because we were just
he's honorary HR.
Fantastic, because we were just on your Twitter. We were just like, oh my god, this is
amazing.
amazing.
I'm not super active on there anymore, but I've got it right there in my bio that I'll send pictures of my dog upon request.
Close to the most photogenic dog I've seen in game development for a long time.
It's so easy to take nice pictures of him.
We were talking a little bit about that process of your real life in and working, because this year has been a very strange year for making anything really. What's the process been like working through developing and releasing a game in 2020 for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously a big chunk of it was all spent working from home, which was a challenge. I mean, working from home isn't something that was like foreign to us. Like we've got, actually one of our programmers, he lives down in New South Wales, actually. And he's been with us since like early on Satellite Rain. So we've been set up for that sort of thing for a while, but it was still, it was really challenging trying to be collaborative when nobody could be in the same room. Like trying to, you're trying to like, you have a conversation, you're just bouncing ideas around and that sort of thing. It's just so much harder to do when everybody is at home and, talking over Slack or whatever your communication tool is, and without even the option to just like, oh, let's just meet up for an hour at lunch or something like it. That was tough. But I mean, we managed it. What really made it tough was the fact that we were trying to do all of this during, like basically our submission period, trying to get builds out to like all the platform holders, like the Xbox build and the PlayStation build and Switch builds and all that sort of thing. And we've only got a handful of dev kits. And when we're all here together, obviously people have access to, everybody can sort of access the machines when they need to, but that wasn't so easy when you had to send them off to people's homes and nobody could visit them or see it. So 2020 developing has been very a big change. We're very glad that Queensland's managed to get things under control. We've got friends that we talk to down in Melbourne who are still having to work from home, and that would be really challenging to have been for this much time, to be having to deal with all of those challenges. So my heart goes out to them, but keep going. Yeah, it's certainly been. I hope it's not something that becomes the norm.
Yeah. We do hear this thing that people say it's going to be the new normal, but I think there's only so much of this that people can handle. I guess one thing we always like to ask developers who've been in the game for a while is the piece of advice that you would give to aspiring game developers, things that you would wish you knew when you first kicked off into this career. What would you say to young people starting in the game development industry?
Well, I would say that, I mean, if you've got a game that you're making, one thing that we found with Windbound was it took us some time to find our feet on what exactly Windbound would be early on. Like we had the broad concepts, but we sort of we found it was really easy to sort of get tunnel vision focused on like just this one particular thing, and not without sort of keeping in mind the big picture. So probably like play testing often. That's a thing that there are a lot of problems we came up against in Windbound that we found solutions for, but we would have found them a lot earlier if we had have just taken more time to play the game. Because it's easy to feel like when you've got a lot of work to do, that if you just sit down and play the game, it's like, no, I've got things to do. I can't just sit here playing it. But it's so important to do. So that's a thing that we will definitely be doing more of. Less of an aspiring game developer thing, but more just a general thing. I mentioned before, like with launching on all these different platforms, we shipped Windbound on everything. It was like PC, Xbox, Switch, like even like Stadia, platforms like that, which are brand new and we've never used before. There's a lot of things that you can do on one platform, but you can't do on another, and they can be quite particular about what you need to do. So it's important to be aware of all of those things ahead of time. Know where you're launching, I guess. Well, thankfully, we were lucky. Like having a publisher like Deep Silver helped us a lot with all of the testing there, and obviously having launched a lot of games, they knew what to look for in that respect. So they were able to point out a lot of issues for us before we sent them off to the platforms, and they sent them back saying, "No, you didn't do this." So we again lucky. We got lucky with that. But yeah, play testing and being aware
know
of
your limits
what's
almost
required.
in a way.
Sorry, what was that?
Know your limitations on the platform you're releasing on.
Yeah, it's not so much the limitations. Like you can do a lot. It's just like you can't do the same thing on every platform, basically. Yeah.
One of the suggestions that's come through, and I don't know if this is going to work into Windbound in the future, but a lot of people love the idea of Koji being an NPC.
They want it, Mitch. They want it. They want him in the game bad.
Some DLC doggo, or as Dark Madam V has said, dog loadable content. So
Dog loadable content.
I'm sorry, Mitch.
There will be no arguments here in the studio.
well, that's pretty much all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much, Mitch, for sharing a little bit of the process, telling us a little bit about your history in game development. We really appreciate you coming on the program and having a chat to us.
Thank you very much. It was really good. Thank you for having me.
And so if you want to find out more about it, as you mentioned there, Mitch, it's on a lot of different platforms. But if you want to go to windboundgame.com, or you can look for at Windbound Game on Twitter, that's the best places to get pointed in the right direction. Now, Pixel Sift is produced by Scott Quigg, Sarah Ireland, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Mitch Lowe, Daniel Ang, Adam Christou, and myself. And we wouldn't have been able to make 155 episodes of Pixel Sift if it wasn't for the support of Murdoch University. Go check them out. Tell them we sent you. And if you're keen to learn more about a creative degree, you can head to murdoch.edu.au/arts. That's murdoch.edu.au/arts.
And you can also come join us on our Discord. We'd love to have you there. That's pixelsift.com.au/Discord, where you can share your creative work, talk about topics and games and anything else. That's pixelsift.com.au/Discords. And what I'd like you to do, if I can ask you a favor, we need people to help share the show. So if you tell a friend, just grab their phone, just subscribe them to Pixel Sift. Search Pixel Sift. It's the big yellow icon. You can't miss it. And we know that getting started can be tricky, but once you start, you love it too much to leave.
Next week, we'll be back with an episode of Pixel Sift Plays. We'll be continuing a play out of the Australian game Moving Out, which I know everyone is super keen for. So that's all for this week. Thank you for joining us again, Mitch.
Thank you for having me.
And we will catch you all again next time. Until then, have fun.
See ya.